Welcome to the Candid Capital podcast special edition at the inaugural Web3 conference in Ottawa. Thank you for coming, and for those who do not know who you are, this is Alex Tapscott, his latest book on Web3. And to get going here, how did you get into Web3?
Well, I first learned about the Bitcoin in 2013. This is before the word Web3 existed, and certainly even before the word blockchain had entered the vernacular. There was this one single asset. And the more I looked into it, the more convinced, I became that this was more than just some speculative investment or even more than some new and novel way to move value. It was potentially ushering in a new era of the web. That for 30 years we'd had an internet of information, and what Bitcoin sort of enabled and what the underlying technology of blockchain really made possible was an internet of value, a way to move money and other assets over the web peer to peer. So to make a long story short, within a year and a half of discovering Bitcoin, I'd quit my job as an investment banker to write a book, having never written a book before and with no idea of what was going to come after it. But I got lucky in my choice of co-author. My dad, Don Tapscott, is a prolific author, and I collaborated on a book which eventually became Blockchain Revolution. Launched in 2016. The book has been translated into 19 languages, has sold more than 500,000 copies worldwide, and is largely credited with being the book that I think helped to explain to a mainstream audience for the first time what the potential of blockchain was. And so since then, I've done dozens of things in the space. I've been an investor, an advisor, consultant, launched a research institute. Today, I work as a portfolio manager of an ETF that trades on the Toronto Stock Exchange called the Web3 Innovators Fund. And I'm also focused on education, which led me to think about a new book and write a new book, Web3, Charting the Internet's Next Economic and Cultural Frontier, which debuted as a Wall Street Journal bestseller in September of this year. And I think that really underscores how broad the interest is in the topic. And I'm really happy with how it's done so far.
So since this is a Canadian conference,
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to get your take on how you see Web3 in Canada and where it's going and where it could go.
Well, Canada, for a brief moment in time, was a global leader in Web3. A lot of the early developers of Bitcoin were Canadian, and the entire founding team of Ethereum pretty much was Canadian. Vitalik Buterin, Joe Lubin, Anthony Diorio, and several others. And, if you think about it, Ethereum is basically the most successful Canadian startup ever. It's probably the most successful Canadian business venture ever. It's got a market capitalization of $250 billion. We're in Ottawa right now. That's 3 times the size of Shopify. It's more than 1.5 times as big as the market cap of RBC. And I think that Canadians largely are ignorant of the fact that we, for a period of time, were a leader in helping to develop the Web3 ecosystem. Since then, we've totally lost our way and we've totally lost our lead. All of the developers of that platform no longer live in Canada, pretty much. Most of the startups that are built on top of Ethereum have been founded by people living outside of Canada. And in general, today, the ecosystem is kind of a shell of its former self. So where do we go from here? Well, I do think that there's potential to steer the ship back in the right direction. And I think that there are steps underway in Canada to create the conditions, the regulatory conditions for the industry to succeed. We have some of the best universities in the world and some of the best developer talent in Web3 coming out of schools like Waterloo, U of T, and others. And what we're experiencing, and frankly, is just a brain drain, often of people who graduate with degrees and an interest in this topic, who find that they can't fulfill whatever objectives they want in Canada, and they go somewhere else. Silicon Valley was once called a tech Galapagos because of the unique combination of talent, capital, universities, corporations, VC, and so forth that led to the unique species of company that went on to dominate the first era of the web. This time is different. Technology, capital, and opportunity is more distributed than ever, and this technology decentralizes things further. So the Silicon Valley of the future is not going to be one place. It's going to be many places. It's going to be online. So where does Canada fit into that? Places like the United States have the benefit of succeeding in spite of what the government does because of all the other things it has going for it. Here in Canada, we don't have that advantage. We need to create the conditions for private enterprise and for innovators to succeed. And though there's progress in that direction, there's a lot more that we could be doing.
So from your point of view, what conditions do we need to address for Web3 specifically in Canada?
Well, right now, the government is very focused on innovation and has touted the benefits of things like AI, quantum computing, and other technologies like electronic batteries, right? Why is Web3 not a priority of the government? Web3 is ushering in a new era for the internet. And I think, like other eras of the internet, it's going to be transformational for business. It's going to create a lot of jobs and a lot of wealth. So we need to be starting from the premise that this is an area where we should be focused on. Other governments are doing that. You know, Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister in the UK, said he wants to make the UK a Web3 center in the world. Countries like Dubai and Singapore are investing billions of dollars in attracting capital and attracting founders to set up shop in those countries. Right now, we're not doing any of that. So there's a policy choice that we can make to support Web3 innovation. The second thing is on the regulatory side. On the regulatory side, there is progress being made, and I think in general, our regulators have been more open-minded than their counterparts in the U.S. You know, I worked for a company called 9 Point Partners. We were one of the first to launch a Bitcoin ETF on the Toronto Stock Exchange, the first to make it carbon neutral. That was something that is still not possible in the United States. So Canada, in that respect, has been open-minded. But we should be doing more. I think founders who want launch token projects here need to know that when they're doing that, that they're not running afoul of securities laws. And I think so far there's been pretty limited guidance in that respect. So more clarity, a policy of growth and innovation, and an openness to experimentation would be three things. If the government could do that, then we'd be putting ourselves in the right footing.
So, you know, there's positivity and there's realism. So where do you see Canada going? Do you think we're going to catch up? Do you think we're going to make these regulations? Or are we kind of just waiting for what happens in the US?
Well, I mean, like I said, governments and regulators can create the conditions for enterprise to succeed, but ultimately you need innovators who want to be here and to build their businesses here. I think the future is not really something to be predicted, it's something to be achieved. So will we, won't we? I mean, it's a choice. It's a choice that we can all make. We can choose to embrace innovation. We can choose to make ourselves a center where people want to build businesses, where capital wants to invest, or not. Ultimately, it's in our hands.
Okay. And since this is a shorter version, I wanted to ask some questions about the technology that I'm most interested in.
Sure.
And kind of your thoughts on it. So I guess one of the buzzwords of last year was Metaverse.
Yep.
So what are your thoughts on Metaverse?
Well, I think there's a lot of confusion about the metaverse, and I think there are different kinds of definitions. The definition I like the most is that the metaverse is a new shared reality for humanity. It's not necessarily about virtual reality or augmented reality, though I think that will be a big part of it. It's about building a new shared reality for humanity online. And I think right now, most of the visions that people have of the metaverse are where you put on a headset and you enter some environment where you go to socialize, to be entertained, to play games, and to generally just like have fun, right? And I think that's very interesting. But if you're entering these environments where you're beholden to the rules of the company operating this environment, where you have no freedom to do transactions, where all your data belongs to them, and where you don't really have digital property rights over goods that you earn or buy, then that's not some new shared reality. That's just virtual Disneyland. And virtual Disneyland sounds like a fine idea. You know, Disneyland is fun, so I hear. But that's not, you know, building some fundamentally new and innovative thing, right? That's recreating and perpetuating an old model on the internet. So I think if you want to fulfill the vision of a metaverse, you need to be able to create the conditions that exist in our real world online. And by that, I mean people online and in these environments need to have a reasonable right to privacy. They need to have digital property rights. You know, we have property rights in the real world. If you own your home, you have title to your home, you can sell your home. You know, someone can't expropriate it. And you need to have the freedom to do transactions, right? If you want to buy or sell assets or take them in and out of environments, you should be able to do that without having to pay some huge levy or tax to some central authority like a gaming company or a platform. And I think right now, most of the models that people have envisioned don't include those things. So yeah, to fulfill the metaverse potential, to give the metaverse a second life, if you will, you need these Web3 tools.
Okay, and to wrap up with two final questions,
Yeah.
If you could share a really cool use case in Web3 that you've been kind of watching or seeing developed that maybe mainstream audience wouldn't be aware of.
Yep.
And second, you write books, but what are you reading?
Well, right now I'm actually reading the American Prometheus, the book about Oppenheimer.
Oh,
That the
okay.
movie is based off of. The movie came out, and I was like, I think I should read that biography, because I hadn't, and I heard a lot of great things about it, and it's a fascinating story for a lot of reasons. One, it shows how governments can, when focused on singularly focused on something, and with the right people in charge, can achieve monumental feats like building an atomic bomb, but also how technologies can go awry when put into the wrong hands, right? I think nuclear power is actually a classic example of a technology that hasn't fulfilled its potential. A lot of technologies have accidents or problems in the early days, but we move on from them. The first trains derailed often, and people died, but you know what? Trains kept on chugging along. But with something like nuclear power, we had a couple of high-profile accidents in the 70s and 80s, and that really derailed the growth of the industry. Now, that's not in this book, but I think it's a telling story about how we need to understand that technologies don't succeed on their own. They're not a sure thing, right? And I think that that's something that Web3 innovators should take to heart. In terms of use cases, the thing I'm most excited about right now is decentralized physical infrastructure. So Web3 starts with the premise that internet users should be internet owners, that you can have user-owned networks that can do stuff that companies do today, right? You can have user-owned networks that are global computers like Ethereum, user-owned networks for finance like Uniswap or Compound. And in DeepIn, you have user-owned networks for physical infrastructure, things like cellular networks, cloud computing, even things like mapping data. So I've had a couple of conversations recently with the team from Render Network, which is a great example of how DeepIn is helping to address real world problems. Right now, there's a huge demand to render, to do graphic design for games, for film, for TV, for the metaverse. And there's an insufficient amount of supply of GPUs, right, of computer chips that can handle this kind of work. So what the Render Network does is basically create an incentive payment for people to pool their computers into a user-owned network. And that network is now being used by Disney and other big studios to help to generate in real time very quickly high quality graphic design. And I think that's very fascinating. Another one that I'm really interested in is Hive Mapper. Hive Mapper is a user-owned network for mapping data. So today, Google Maps is the dominant provider of mapping data in the world, not only for people like you and me who use the app, but for state houses, insurance companies, hospitals, like, anybody who needs mapping data basically uses the API that Google provides. Hive Mapper, though, starts with the premise that you can have a user-owned network. People have a dash cam, they're recording all this data, and you can actually end up getting better and more real-time information about what's happening at street level. With that kind of a network than with Google, because it doesn't matter how many Google cars are on the road. There are never going to be as many Google cars as there are other cars, right? And Hive Mapper has already mapped 5 million kilometers, or 10% of the world's surface, and it's only been around for about a year. So it's a very, very cool project. In certain cities like in LA and New York and Seoul, Korea, they're mapping and remapping the data like constantly, right? So, you go into Google Maps, you see an image of your house and it's 2 years old. With Hive Mapper, the data can be, up to the minute, or at least up to the last sort of few days. And I think that's very interesting. So these are examples of how we can harness the potential of the crowd to harness people and their assets to solve real world problems. Everything from mapping the world to addressing the challenges of the metaverse.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for doing the podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure.
And I'm looking forward to your keynote
Thank you.
later on today.
Great. Thanks.
Bye.